Thank you very kindly, my friends. As I listened to Ralph Abernathy in his eloquent and generous introduction, and then thought about myself, I wondered who he was talking about. It's always good to have your closest friend and associate say something good about you. And Ralph Abernathy is the best friend that I have in the world. I'm delighted to see each of you here tonight. In spite of a storm warning, you reveal that you are determined to go on anyhow. Something is happening in Memphis. Something is happening in our world. And you know, if I was standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general and panoramic view of the whole of history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in? I would take my mental flight by Egypt, and I will watch God's children and their magnificent trek out of the dark dungeons of Egypt, across the Red Sea, through the wilderness and on toward the Promised Land. Amen. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would even go by Greece and take my mind to Mount Olympus, and I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assembled around the Parthenon. And I would watch them around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality, but I wouldn't stop there. I would go by the great heyday of the Roman Empire and see developments there through various emperors and leaders, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the days of the Renaissance and see all that the Renaissance did for the cultural and aesthetic life of man, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even go by the way where the man for whom I am named had his habitat. And I would watch Martin Luther as he attached his 95 Theses to the door at the church at Wittenberg, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to 1863 and see a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln come to the conclusion that he needed to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation and come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, but I wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say that if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Now, that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up, the nation is sick, trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But still, I know that somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God moving in this period in a way that men in some strange way are responding, and something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they be in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same. We want to be free. And another reason why I'm happy to live in this period is that we have been forced to a point where we're going to have to grapple with the problems that men have been grappling with through history, but the demands didn't force them to do it. Survival forces us to grapple with them. Men for years have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and non-violence in this world. It's non-violence or non-existence. That is where we are today. And also in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done, and done in a hurry, to bring the colored people of the world out of their long nights of poverty, their long nights and years of hurt and neglect, then this whole world is doomed. Now I'm just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period, to see what is unfolding. And I want to thank him for allowing me to be in Memphis. And we plan to march again. We have to march again. And I'm asking for your support. Now about injunctions. We have an injunction and we are going into court tomorrow morning to fight this illegal, unconstitutional injunction. All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. And somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights. So just as I say, we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunctions turn us around. We are going on. Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an amazing chance to make this nation a better nation. And I want to thank God once again for allowing me to be here with you. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City, autographing the first book that I had written. And while I was sitting there, autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And as I was looking down writing, I said yes. And in the next instant, I felt something beating on my chest. And before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon, and the blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you drown in your own blood. That's the end of you. And it came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. About 2 or 3 days later, they allowed me to move around the hospital in the wheelchair. And they also allowed me to read some of the mail that came in. And from all over the nation and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but there's one letter that I'll never forget. I received a telegram from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those letters said. I've received a telegram and a visit from the governor of New York. I've forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter and I'll never forget it. She said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." And she said that while it should not matter, I would like to mention that I am a white girl. And I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. Well, I'm simply writing to tell you that I am so happy that you didn't sneeze. I want to say tonight that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960 when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking America back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I would have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I would have been around here in 1962 when the Negroes of Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they're going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I would have been in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, where the Negroes there aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. And if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Selma, Alabama to see the great movement there. And if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around their brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. And the pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that everyone's bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we've looked through everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out of what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. Yes. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Yes. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.